Well, welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest here in Austin, Texas, and am in long-term recovery using the 12 steps. And they've been a lifesaver for me, and I'm sure they have been for many of you folks out there. If you haven't done so, I encourage you to go to the website, Two-Way Prayer, and learn about the form of prayer and meditation that the pioneers in AA did in the very early days. And also, while you're there, sign up for the newsletter and try to get those out every 6 weeks or so. Have a new one coming out pretty soon on step 6 and 7. So I'm just finishing that up. And speaking of finishing things up, we are finishing up here a series on the work of Robert Johnson. And we've done a number of his books. And this one is kind of a deep one. It's called Owning Your Own Shadow. And so it's about shadow work. And I will put a link to the book in the show notes. And I also want you to be aware that just this past week, I found 2 new YouTube videos by this author, Robert Johnson. One is on shadow, and they just went up maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's Robert is long dead, but his spirit is still with us. And I guess people out there find these things and then put them up on YouTube. And I'm so grateful that they did. You will enjoy that. Shadow and active imagination is the other one. So they're both new. I really encourage you to go and listen to them. I think they will fill in a lot of the loose ends that we're still dealing with here. And when I did this series and we finished up 5 episodes and we went through Johnson's book. And but what he didn't do in that book is teach us how to do the process. How do you access the shadow? Now, he touches on that in yet another book called Inner Work, and I'll put that in the show notes too. And there's some guidance in how to do that there. Now, I come at this thing in a funny sort of way. You know, my story is I was doing two-way prayer. And two-way prayer, I believe now, I don't think that I knew it then, is really a form of active imagination. If God were to speak to me, what would he say? And then I allow my thoughts to be free, and I enter into communication with this higher power on the basis of always that the voice is going to be honest, it's going to be pure, it's going to be unselfish, and above all else, it's going to be loving. So what two-way prayer does is it puts us in touch with that part of us, because we are made in the image of God. It's that part of us that is those things, you see. The great reality is within, the big book says, right? So it's in getting in touch with that great reality. So I did that for a good number of years. Kind of tracked down the Oxford group folks and figured out how they did it, and then went off on my own way. And when I went on my own way, some other things came into mind, and I began to integrate those into my two-way prayer practice. And one of them is inner child work, to kind of go inside and find the kid who got left behind. And we'll maybe talk about that a little bit in this episode. So find the kid, establish a relationship with him or her. And then there was a third stage, and that's what this shadow book is about. That there are other parts, fragmented parts of my personality. And Jung was very big on trying to access these parts. because these parts are definitely accessing me, and kind of coming at me through the unconscious. So he developed this form of work. He called it active imagination, and it was a way to deal with shadow parts and dream parts and things of that nature that are going on inside, and they're affecting me, but they're at the unconscious level. So it's really a way to sort of make them conscious. So, I mean, just a 2-minute review, because we don't have time to get into the whole thing, but we're raised in society, and society says, well, this is good and that's bad. This is okay for you to do and think and feel. This is not okay for you to do and think and feel. So what do we do with those parts of ourselves that fall into that left hand side of the seesaw, as Johnson describes it? Well, we put them down into the basement. We shove them out of our consciousness. And that's fine. It's called repression. Everybody does it. We push it down. And it would be fine if it stayed there. The problem is it seeps out, and it can seep out sideways, and somebody else is going to get my stuff that I push down there, or I'm going to inflict it onto myself in some ways in the form of depression, anxiety, and things of that nature. So there's a whole world of stuff going on down there. And a big chunk of it is this shadow stuff. And so what I want to talk about in this final episode is to, give us a few hints, directives on how do you go about accessing it, okay? So I've got I actually called several friends, inviting them to come on and share their garbage with us. And 6 of them went running off into the hills, and I've never heard from them again because they didn't want to do it. But one friend, Mike, up there in Akron, Ohio, agreed to come and share. And so I'm going to quiz him a little bit on some of his practice. I'm going to ask him also, because I think this is the most helpful thing, to share one of his writings. And he's pretty new at it, but I want you to hear what it sounds like. When you're accessing two-way prayer, when I do the workshops on two-way prayer, the best part of it is you listen to somebody else and you hear, oh, that's how you do it. That's what's going on. And that kind of makes it safe and okay to do it. And then I thought I would really embarrass myself and share one of my own that came up just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's kind of fresh, and it's actually something that I'm still working on. So here we go. So Mike, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us. And how is life up there in the holy city of Akron, huh?
Well, hi, Father Bill, and thank you so much for including me in this podcast today. I appreciate it a lot, and I love living in Akron, Ohio. It's a great place to live, and when you mention that to different friends from around the country, whenever you're traveling, they go, "Oh yeah, Akron, I've heard of that."
Right. Well, it's where Dr. Bob, of course, lived, and his influence is still up there. Strongly in some ways, particularly in the form of the Four Absolute. It's probably the only place there in Cleveland, in that section of Ohio, that you go into an AA room or a Al-Anon room or whatever the 12-step program might be, and you're likely to see the Four Absolutes, the honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, hanging on the walls there, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, later on this evening, I intend to go to one of my favorite meetings up here, and there they are posted right on the wall every time. So that's a good
tip. Good. Well, maybe you'll encourage other folks around the country to start doing that practice. Um, so, Mike, tell me a little bit. You came at this thing, I think, pretty much the way I did in terms of doing two-way prayer, and then doing a little bit of inner child work, and then starting to get your feet wet with shadow stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. If I could just quickly say, Father Bill, that the first time I heard your podcast, I heard you speaking about your past and your life and how your journey had been through the program. And I so related to that because I too have long-term sobriety. And somewhere around 25 years, I was just starting to feel like, even though I was doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
doing the deed, it just something was just, I don't want to say it was missing, but I just felt like there had to be more. And I really didn't know where to get it. And as it would go, it led me down a path to where I met you. But I actually started in centering prayer about 5 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
then did some inner child work, which was so beneficial to me. And then you introduced me to the two-way prayer, which I've been doing every day since the first of the year. And again, through getting to know you, you introduced me to Robert Johnson and the shadow work. And,
Right.
I want to say that, and I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but, I've been on a journey. I love God. I love where God has me in my life right now. Some of the things that I have been introduced to, my first thought as a Christian man is that, gosh, I don't know if this is something that I should be doing, if I should be reading this or talking about this. And then the more that you read it and talk about it with fellow believers, the more you see how foundational it is and how strong it is. It's something that has become such an integral part of my life. I just can't imagine doing without it.
Two-way prayer opened me up to real intimacy, uh, not an intellectual connection with God, but a very personal kind of connection, like a friend,
Yes.
which was missing. And I think it almost has to be missing if the communication is always just one way,
Hmm.
one direction, and nothing coming back. Well, it's going to get flat after a while. But the two-way communication just really brought a whole new dimension to my 11th step, and to my 10th step as well, in terms of watching myself, and what's going on inside of me. What is my connection? Is it strong? Is it weak? You could use the example of the internet connection. How many bars do I have going on in my relationship with God?
Yeah.
Is it strong, or am I getting by on one and starting to squeak a lot? You know?
I do know exactly what you mean. A friend of yours from Austin had told me about you. And he was also a person that mentioned to me while reading the big book, there are many, many questions in the big book that really don't necessarily have to be answered, but they certainly need to be asked.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my two-way prayer to begin with, Father Bill, I did a lot of that. I would go to the big book and I would find these questions in there that weren't meant to be answered by me.
Right.
And I would write those in my two-way prayer to God, and He would give me what I was looking for. It was just such a great experience for me. And it really kind of drew me in, it drew me back into my big book in a really cool way. And then also, like you say, that relationship is something that I've so long wanted to have and told myself that I had, but now it's getting deeper and deeper.
Right. And then you what I love about you, Mike, is you'll listen to a podcast and you'll really take it to heart. You'll read a book and you'll read it 3 or 4 times, and you're really trying to get to the essence of what's going on there, because you're hungry for transformation. which and I am too. I mean, I'm coming up on 50 years, but I know that there are parts of me that still are very much in need of being transformed, of changing. To me, it's not a question of well, I changed on such and such a date, and everything has just been wonderful ever since. That
Right.
wouldn't be true. Everything is not wonderful ever since. I keep
Right.
getting presented
Mhm.
with problems and fears and things of that nature that need to be worked through. And what two-way prayer and then inner child and now shadow work has given me is a way to approach these things, these stuck parts in me, the parts
Mhm.
that are still not, they're not where they should be. I haven't surrendered them sufficiently,
Yes.
or even aligned them is a word I like better. Haven't aligned my inner life with the God life. Uh, but it's always a question of fine tuning, I
Mhm.
think. It's not, I don't know that it's ever done, but
Right.
if you can kind of keep it alive and exciting, and I was in Africa. I was always big on the geographical cure, so I went all around the world. But I remember being in Africa, West Africa, and I bought one of those radios. This is years ago, and I would try to tune into the BBC, to kind of get the news. And in those days, I mean, if you just turned that little dial just right, you
Mhm.
might be able to catch the voice.
Yes.
And I think that's a nice analogy for what my receptivity is to
Mhm.
the voice that wants to guide and direct me. So never
I
know
I
what's
do,
going to happen.
I do know just exactly what you mean, Bill. And you mentioned reading books and listening to podcasts, and thank God, I'm at that place in my life where I'm retired and I have the time to do those things. But it's kind of like reading the big book to me, like listening to a podcast two or three times or reading something in a Robert Johnson book two or three times. It seems like each time that it's read, it has
Mhm.
more meaning
Yeah.
and more is revealed than what had been revealed 2 weeks ago. And I love that about God, that He does that with me. And I get anxious to do it. If I could, you mentioned something about the 10 step there, and I wanted to kind of tell you where I was on this with the 10 step. Um, I mean, I feel like there is a direct link between shadow work and true 10 step work. And
Mhm.
I'm really not talking about, the lighthearted 10 step things that you hear at a meeting when someone says, what we have is a daily reprieve. I'm not talking about that at all. To me, it has gone so deep. It's like, I know Robert Johnson says in his book that, and I wrote this down, he said, if I do my shadow upkeep, I will not land my shadow on an unsuspecting stranger. I have to honor my shadow, for it's an integral part of me. And he says it just really takes a 5-minute acknowledgement. And since I've begun doing this practice with you, Bill, like I have seen, I always wondered, why, I'd have these critical thoughts of someone just out of the blue. Like I
Mhm.
wake up in the morning and God would put someone on my heart and I would immediately think something negative about them. And I would say, why am I feeling that way? And I never knew what to do with it. And to me, I just figured it was a character defect. And
Right.
when I started, the practice of shadow work, what I started seeing was that you said to me one day that the way that you treat your shadow is the way your shadow will treat you. And that hit home with me. It's like, okay, so if I respect my shadow is going to respect me. If I want to spend time with my shadow is going to want to spend time with me. If I want to have a conversation with my shadow, one of mutual respect, he'll do the same with me. And
That's
what
right.
I started seeing was initially, like if I'd have a negative thought about someone or something, I would immediately go to my shadow and I would say, was that you that showed up just now?
Mm,
Was that you that showed
right.
up last night? And to me, Father Bill, it's just like that, watching. It's like you're watching to see if he's got something to say or something to do, and then talking to him about it and working through it. And it's that paradox that Johnson talks about, which starts out to be a bad thing can really end up being a really good thing.
Yeah, my understanding of shadow is that they contain a gift, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit. That they come with great force, since it is coming from the unconscious. It's got tremendous power. Johnson says it's like 100,000 watts of electricity, and I can't handle that. It's going to overwhelm me. Okay. Um, but if I can plug in properly, then I can access the power that's there. But the ego has a role in this. See, this is where sometimes in 12-step stuff, people often say, "Well, I got to get rid of my ego," and it drives me crazy because it's so not what I need to do. What I need to do is right size my ego,
Mm-hmm.
and right size my God,
Mm-hmm.
and be in alignment with those two. And then this side stuff comes in, this shadow stuff starts coming in. So you had a critic. You were kind of starting off that there's a critical part of you
Yes.
that kind of takes over your mind
Yes.
and runs you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perfect description of shadow, that it comes up from the unconscious and grabs a hold of me and controls me in ways that I don't want to really be controlled, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I get rageful or I get terrified, you know? And rather what the way Jung comes at it, it's very interesting. He says, rather than saying, I have anger, I have rage, I turn it around. Rage has me.
Mm-hmm.
The shadow overwhelms. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what we're trying to do in this process is, yes, recognize it in 10, and then make it a part of my prayer life in a sense,
Yeah.
that I get to know it, that this is a part of me that I must accept and then do some negotiations with. So let's go ahead and jump in and
Okay.
hear what you have in this exercise you did.
Okay. And this is just a short one from about a week ago. And
Okay.
it was one of those days where I woke up in the morning and for some reason I just thought of this person. And like I say, I started thinking, just critical thoughts, negative thoughts for whatever reason, And one thing I will say is, and you and I talked about this, I say to myself after years of what I call good sobriety, before all this, I would say I shouldn't be feeling this way. I
And,
should
and
be.
and what would you
I
do with it? What would you do with it then?
Yeah, I
You'd
know,
push
and
it
it's
down. You'd push it. Get back in the basement. You.
exactly, yeah.
Right.
Because you have this much sobriety, you shouldn't be thinking or feeling this way. Then something
Right.
comes along and takes your mind off it, and boom, it's back down in the basement. But sooner or later, it comes back up. Okay, so
Just before, because I'm going to forget. Okay, I'm older than you are, so you cut me a little slack here. I'm going to forget this, and I did want to share it. I missed it in the Johnson book, in the other episodes, but it's nice, a preliminary to what you're going to share. And he's talking about marriage, okay, and the role of shadow work in marriage, and he says this. The shadow is very important in marriage, and we can make or break a relationship depending on how conscious we are of this. We forget that falling in love, we must also come to terms with what we find annoying and distasteful, even downright intolerable in the other, and also in ourselves. Yet it is precisely this confrontation that leads to our greatest growth. And this is the funny part that I think everybody will enjoy. He says, I recently heard about a couple who had the good sense to call upon the shadow in a pre-wedding ceremony. The night before their marriage, they held a ritual where they made their shadow vows. The groom said, I will give you an identity and make the world see you as an extension of myself. The bride replied, and I will be compliant and sweet, but underneath, I will have the real control. If anything goes wrong, I will take your money and your house. They then drank a toast and laughed heartily at their foibles, knowing that in the course of the marriage, these shadow figures would invariably come out. They were ahead of the game because they had recognized the shadow and unmasked it.
That is so good. I wish that I would have the sense to do something like that.
But it's these thoughts and these feelings that are going on inside of us. And and they ask, well, how are you doing? Fine.
I know.
I'm fine. And I'm not treating the shadow with respect. I'm not getting to. So the critic, I know the critic really well. He's a very large, he has a large domain in my shadow world. And so you got in touch with yours. So I interrupted. So
okay.
Go ahead.
The one thing I will say about the critic in here, and that is that when I first started doing this, the critic was very sarcastic with me, but he softened somewhat over the last, few weeks. So this was from a short while ago. Hello, I want to ask if that was you when Mr. X came into my thoughts this morning. They were critical thoughts. My shadow says, hey, you really are paying attention now. What will you do with this? I say, well, what will we do with this? Shadow, you have to admit he is controlling and condescending. This is me. Yes, I have learned about him, but still I want to respect him. The shadow says, let's see if you can really live and let live. I say, I can sure use that as my goal with him. Shadow, you are the one that invited him into your life. I say, yes, I did, but I have learned to use discernment. My intent is to know him and help him, but also to remain centered, which is what I have tried to focus on with him. Shadow, yes, but you have to admit you have not spent as much time with him lately. Myself, not intentionally, but I'm happier this way. Shadow, okay, so what are you going to do about this? And I say, I'll pray about it and get back to you. Shadow's response, well, let's see if you actually do.
Yeah.
And I say, you got it. And that's the end of it.
Right. So you took responsibility for it. You didn't give control over to the shadow, though, eh?
Yes.
You negotiated.
That's right.
That's the role of the ego.
Yeah, and I just felt like Robert Johnson says, Bill, I'm honoring him and acknowledging him.
Right.
And truthfully, when you have an engagement like that, once you have it and it's over, it's over. I mean, I don't go back to thinking about it at all. I'll go back to I'll come back to them every 2 or 3 days and reread them and look at them again, but they've lost all their energy. There's nothing there.
I take longer.
Okay.
But maybe some of us are sicker than others, So, yeah. But I tell you this, in the moment, it is resolved. In the moment, we talk in 6 and 7, I'm ready to have this thing removed. Well, it does get removed. If I really do that, it gets removed. Now, the ego has an opportunity to come back in and resurrect stuff and look at it yet again. And I do find myself doing that less and less. And the more I have resolved it, the more I'm able to move into laughing at myself, because there it is again. Now I have a choice. Am I going to play with it, or am I going to turn to God with it? All right. Yeah. Beautiful. So tell us how that was effective for you, Mike. What did that exercise give you in kind of in your mood, in your relationship with that guy?
Well, the biggest thing I can say, Bill, is that it really, to me, it brings me back into a right relationship with that person and my shadow, like almost immediately. Like I'm not when I have these conversations now with my shadow, like I say, when the conversation's over with, it's like it's gone. I'm not thinking about anything negative with that person again, or I'm not I don't feel like I've stuffed it or put it down in the basement. I feel like I've brought it up. We've had the conversation.
Right.
He made his points. I made mine. We have an agreement. Off we go.
My understanding of Jung and of shadow is this, that the shadow has a gift, that if you can look at your shadow, let's take the critic, for example. Okay. The critic is going to analyze things. It's going to look to the negative side of things. That's what it is going to do. Now, that can be a gift.
Yes.
That you're able to look critically at something without getting overwhelmed by the inner critic. Very different.
Yes.
It's very different. And that's what I think part of the negotiation that needs to go on in bringing it to consciousness. And then the ego steps in and says, yes, what you're saying is true. I hear you. Okay. But we have to live together.
That's
now,
right.
How are we going to live together without killing one another?
Right.
And that's the so extract the gift is something that I'm always kind of looking for in a shadow part. Not to just run away from it. It's totally negative, probably there for a reason. So I'm going to read one of mine. It's a little bit, it's fair, not, well, it's fairly long. It was a Saturday 2 weeks ago, and one led to another. So it's part of a two-way prayer, and then it leads into a shadow work exercise, because that's where I was directed to go. So I won't go into the background, but my things are kind of connected oftentimes. Like what I was dealing with the day before, I always read that, and then often that will become part of my prayer for that next day, what came up. So there was something left over. Lord, tell me more about this inner sanctuary, this place of peace that exists inside of me that I have access to, but I don't always go there. So I listen to Jesus. He says, my brother, am I too good to be true? Your ego would tell you so, but don't you believe it? Come, explore, experience for yourself. I went often to pray. This is our time to remove yourself from the drama of life. Come, sit with the director. There's an old AA theme. God is the director. We're the actors. Come sit with the director. Receive your lines. Then go back on stage. Both places are real, inner world, outer world. Both, place both in my hands. Not one over the other, but each merged, joined with one another. And then today he says, write to Hamlet. And this was weird. It was like, write to Hamlet your stuckness. He is current. So Hamlet, we did another Johnson, to be or not to be, indecisive, refuses to act, stuck. So what Hamlet was going to give me, and I like to name my shadow parts with funny names. It helps me kind of engage with them. So I'm going to talk to Hamlet, and I'm directed by God to do exactly that. So self. I've never addressed you before, but I know you're there, and I know it's time. I'm ready to welcome you into consciousness. Who are you? Tell me about yourself. Hamlet. Hello, Bill. You've been doing pretty good lately. Reading Edinger helps. You knew that from the start. He knows. I ran across Edward Edinger back in, I think, around 1990, and he's just opened doors for me. The minute I read his book, it was like, I don't understand 3/4 of it, but I know he's got a lot to offer me. So I keep going back. Hamlet, who am I? I am your stuckness, your refusal to act. I come in the form of worry about this, worry about that, just so long as you keep from acting, doing, really. Self, when did you first appear? I'll often try to go back. When did you start to show up in my life? He says, when chaos prevailed in childhood, to act then wasn't possible. So you spun around, stuck in your head, seeming to act, but not with your whole self. Something was always held back. The book says, give yourself completely to this simple program. You, in your thoughts, complicate it, worry about it. Am I doing it wrong? That's me, Hamlet says. Are you here to protect me? That's my best understanding. Is that true? He says, I'm here to tell you it's not safe. Self, it wasn't. For a long time, it wasn't. And I thank you for what you did. Thank you for giving me a place to go, a safe place, deep inside. But it's getting late now. The play is nearing its end. I can die a tragedy of worried unfulfillment, or I can begin to risk it all. I'm ready to gamble all on God. He's everything or he's nothing. I thank you for protecting me for so long, but it is now time to act. Hamlet, do I still have a role in the play? Self, absolutely. Provide me with counsel and with caution. Hamlet, that's my specialty. Okay, perhaps it's time for me to change too. Is it too late for me to become the wise old man? Self, no. Maybe we're both ready to change. All right. So it's kind of writing a play.
Yes.
Where the ego, the self, is there, and you're engaging with this energy force that's in you, and you give it a name, all right, and you allow it to speak. It's like going to a therapist, and the therapist will say, "Tell me more, tell me more," and then you begin pouring out your soul. All right. But then you switch back. Now, you really got hurt. I understand. But now I'm here for you. And what I'm doing in that process is I am integrating the various and fractured and separated parts of myself. I am owning them, bringing them to consciousness, treating them with respect, but not giving them the keys to the car.
Yep.
Not doing that, because that would be irresponsible. So I mean, that's kind of I'm always a little bit embarrassed to share some of this stuff that goes on inside my head. But it's the stuff that's there,
Yeah.
and so to give it form, to give it expression, and then it's made me very conscious, because I'm not done with this Hamlet character. Uh, I'm watchful for every time he shows up.
Hmm.
And instead of doing something productive, I'm going to sit there and play a puzzle, or turn on TV, or tune out to life in some way or other, rather than engaging at deeper levels.
Hmm.
See, and so that's that. He's very helpful for that. There's that energy, or there's that critic, or there's that addiction that is calling to me. It gives you a way to engage with them. you know
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's the whole thing. Now, Johnson does make a point, and I'll make this point too, that it's helpful to have somebody to process your stuff with, if you get lost. Now, I've never gotten lost, and every addict that I've ever worked with has not gotten lost. I've never seen one. But if you have no ego strength,
Hmm.
then perhaps you could get overwhelmed. And in that case, the point is to build up your ego before you're even ready to take on some of these characters. And if you went to a therapist, that would be what the therapist would do. With most
Hmm.
addicts, that's not what has to happen. With most of us, our egos are super strong,
Right.
and they have to be brought down. But it's a good caution, and I kind of, when you start extending two-way prayer into inner child world and shadow world, I think you're entering into kind of a divine sort of therapy, where the deeper hurts, particularly from childhood, are being healed and and integrated into a fuller personality. So to own these parts that I would, in the past, like yourself, ban down to the basement, bring them
Hmm.
upstairs, talk to them. Uh, they have something to teach us. They have something to teach us.
Yeah, one thing I would add, Bill, from my end, right, going back to the beginning, at first I felt like I had to come up with something like, okay, where am I going to come up with this conversation? And then, through prayer, through two-way prayer, it was shown to me that it truly is the 10th step where you watch and listen. You had said to me quite a while ago that if you're not watching, you don't have anything to pray for. And that makes so much sense to me, because if I'm truly watching what's going on with me, with my feelings and my thoughts, I don't have to worry about coming up with anything. It's there. My shadow is trying to tell me something. I just need to listen.
Yeah, but that is why I would say to people, find your God within, your higher power, your connection, before you do this work. And then if you ever get lost, you can always return to that.
Yes.
Sometimes you'll be sent to that other part. Sometimes I'll go in my two-way prayer, and I want to talk to God or Jesus, and he'll say, "You don't need to talk to me. You need to go talk to the kid inside you. That's who's Go do your own work. Don't look to me to fix you. You know,
Right. Right.
go do that." And the same thing with shadow. Go engage these parts. So I thank you, Mike, for coming on and sharing some of your experience, strength, and insanity.
Exactly.
You
That's
know?
one way to put it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. This was my inner stuff, and I'm okay with it. I'm
Right.
more and more okay with it. And I think the more we can do that, uh, the more whole we're going to be, and the more available we're going to be to other people who are
Hmm.
doing the same damn thing that we're doing,
Right.
but
Right.
just not talking about it. Yeah. Okay, well, guys, that was kind of the loose end that I felt was hanging there with this series. I wanted to give you, a couple of examples of what shadow work might look like. I'm going to direct you to those two YouTube videos and to the other book that Johnson gives called Inner Work, where he goes into much greater depth in how you engage the shadow on a day-to-day basis. And I think Mike is absolutely right that this is an engaging way to do your 10th step, to watch, to see what's going on internally, and to call it to consciousness, to bring it up, take responsibility, engage with it under God's guidance. You handle it. So I see it's getting dark up there in Akron. So shadows are coming out, man. I will let you go. Thanks again, Mike, for doing this. I really do appreciate it. And I thank all of you folks out there for listening. I hope the series was helpful. We are starting a new one next week that I'm really excited about. There's a fellow professor by the name of Stephen Haynes, wrote a book called Why Can't Church Be More Like an AA Meeting? And he's got some really, really good things to say. He's traveled in both worlds. And so I'm going to start a series on, you always hear people say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I understand that. Said it myself for 20 years, but my question is going to be, does religion have anything to offer someone who's on the spiritual path? So that's what we're going to explore. I think you'll find it interesting. I know Stephen's a great teacher for where we're going to go. So thank you guys for listening. If you got any other ideas for podcasts, please drop me a line, let me know. But you take good care. God bless, and keep coming back.